meeting, and you have any questions about any of the homework or how we're going to finish on Friday before we start? This is my favorite prescription. Can you read it there? It's kind of blurry, but it says Happy Pills. Chocolate covered peanuts. Those are my Happy Pills. Y'all don't see.
I was concerned for a second, Mr. Binks.
I made my own bottle. I like to have odd, unique stuff in my office. I have a copy of Michael. What's the name of the guy on The Office? Michael.
Michael Scott.
I have Michael Scott's book, Somehow I Manage.
That's awesome.
I have a copy of Dr. Rick from Progressive Commercials.
Oh.
I have a copy of his book. Now they're blank, they're like notebooks.
Oh, yeah.
I have a copy of Leo Marvin's book from What About Bob? I'm going to start working on having a copy of Simon Finch's book from Elf, a little guy who wrote children's books.
Mhm.
And he left his notebook in the office. So I want to have a copy of that. And then I'm trying to find a copy of Dr. Todd's book. Dr. Todd was a guest doctor on one of Reba's episodes where Barbara Jean brought Dr. Todd in and they had relationship counseling. Do you remember that one? Y'all ever watch Reba?
Reba
My
McEntire.
mom used to watch Reba all the time.
The show Reba. Oh, the peanut scratched my throat.
Mr. Binks loves their kids and never stops. A gentle hand and a heart of a fighter.
That's so loud.
Are we recording?
We are recording.
That's great.
This will be one of those collector episodes of Mr. Bing's American Federal Government Classes. The episode where Panama sang the Reba theme song.
Yes.
Wait, I need to play it. Oh.
All right. Are any of y'all's advisors and teachers in there, by the way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Miss Dana.
Okay.
Does he need me?
She's part of the cartel.
Oh,
The
cartel. She's right here. You need me for something?
Someone else is playing another Reba song.
A victim of circumstance, the one who ought to give up, but she's just too hard-headed. A single mom who works 2 jobs, who loves her kids and never stops, with gentle hands and a heart of a fighter. I'm a survivor.
Mr. Bing?
Huh?
Did you just shave?
No, I was saying stop. I didn't know it was an actual song. I thought she just sang it for the show.
It's Reba.
I know. I thought she just sang a theme song.
I'm just looking
Uh-uh.
I didn't know it was one of her actual songs. I'm old school Reba, so I'm only up with her 80s stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, by the way, I'll send you the 2 last Christmases today and tomorrow. And if some of you have not voted yet, you should have those emails in your Carl Albert email box of the previous last Christmases. All right, chapter 18, let's finish foreign policy. What's the name of that song, by the way? Survivor?
Survivor, yeah.
Okay. I'll take a listen to it. we stopped on Monday by talking about the description of our foreign policy today. It's a multilateralist foreign policy, which means we have multi or many. We have many, I'll use the metaphor of a door. We have many doors that we can go through in our relationships with other countries. There are, well, we'll get to those at the end of the slides because that's how the chapter ends. So the Cold War began after the end of World War II, about 1945. And the Cold War ended in 1989. What happened in 89? November of 89. Anybody? Something happened to a certain wall. A wall in Germany.
Girl was walking near the.
Yes, what happened to the Berlin Wall? November of 89.
It got destroyed.
Yeah, they started to tear it down. And that was kind of the official, or I should say unofficial, but very picturesque beginning of the end of the Cold War. And so since 89 and 90, what has taken center stage is terrorism. Terrorist attacks, terrorist groups and organizations are kind of at the center stage of our national security right now. But even in saying that, in the last few years, we've had kind of an additional primary focus with those four nations that are mentioned in the chapter: North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China. But terrorism took center stage because in 2001, the 9/11 attacks, George Bush was president, and under his leadership, there was a new foreign policy strategy added to our, let's just say, our cabinet of foreign relationship policies. And that was called the Bush Doctrine. And what it says is, if we are aware of terrorist groups, if we are aware of them about to attack us, whether they're about to attack our country or whether they're about to attack some of our foreign ambassadors or attack some of our embassies in other nations, or maybe if they're about to attack some of our allies, we will be preemptive. That means we will strike first, even if we know that there's a planned hostile attack from an enemy. And even if the US is uncertain about the time and place. Now, terrorism became a threat. And even before 9/11, there were terrorist attacks here and there. The World Trade Center in '93 was attacked. So that was 8 years before 9/11. There was a car bomb in one of the garages of the one of the World Trade Towers. I think it killed about 5 people. There were attacks on one of our embassies. There was an attack on a foreign embassy, but that nation was one of our allies. And I think there was a couple of attacks on some of our naval bases. And of course, there was the attack right here in our own state in '95 with the Oklahoma City bombing. But that was not a foreign enemy, that was an enemy from within. So terrorism was added to the nuclear threat because in the 1980s, Russia and ourselves, we built up this large nuclear arsenal. So after Vietnam, now we're talking about the foreign policy aspect of war. After Vietnam, we moved from what was called conventional war. So you got to think of World War II, World War I, and the Korean War. Those were conventional wars that had regular military troops who wore uniforms. Usually the fighting was in large open areas or forests that was away from away from cities and towns for the most part. Heavy weapons like tanks and other armored vehicles, jeeps, airplanes were used, combat boats. And there were large units of troops. There was a lot of logistical support, an arsenal of missiles, sonar, submarines, all kinds of logistical support. And those armies were recognized as an arm of a government. But with Vietnam, we moved more into an unconventional war that involved guerrilla warfare. Now, concerning the Vietnam War, North Korea used guerrilla warfare. There was a liberation force from North Korea, something for the liberation of South Vietnam. I said North Korea, it should be Vietnam, sorry. And those were guerrilla fighters. I think there was about 16,000 not troops, there were 16,000 guerrilla soldiers in the Liberate South Vietnam forces. They were irregular forces. They were in smaller units instead of big combat units. They were highly mobile. They didn't have the logistical support as armies fighting in the conventional war. They didn't have a lot of the modern technology as far as rifles, missiles, but it was very unconventional. They would send children into villages where there were American troops, and these children would have bombs strapped to them, and the children would blow up. And because the children were Vietnam, and they didn't know if they were North or South Vietnamese. They looked all the same. And so going into villages in the South Vietnam area was a dangerous thing, because there could be a North Vietnamese cell group in there. And they didn't fight conventional ways. They used unconventional methods. So they blended in with the public. Not always, but a lot of times the guerrilla warfare is not recognized as an official arm of the government. In non-conventional warfare or conflict, you can differentiate guerrilla warfare, in which the guerrilla soldiers are on purpose targeting military personnel or military bases in order to achieve a political goal. Terrorism, on the other hand, targets civilians in order to achieve a political goal. So guerrilla warfare would be going after, if we use the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese guerrillas would be targeting the soldiers of the United States. They would be targeting United States bases in Vietnam or camps. They would not be targeting the citizens of Vietnam unless they, for example, like I said earlier, if they sent in a child strapped with a bomb, and although the child was supposed to be amongst mostly the US troops, if there was any collateral damage, including any citizens, that was just a casualty of war. Terrorists, on the other hand, don't target the military. They tend to target civilians as well. Today, we have another type of warfare that we have to worry about, cyber warfare. We might call this unconventional as well, but we'll just remember for the test's sake, cyber warfare. And this can include anything from putting ads on social media like Facebook and Twitter, trying to change the algorithms on those platforms so that, for example, we hear a lot of this, tampering with the elections of America, trying to get a certain politician or candidate in America to be elected because they feel like maybe that person would be easier to influence and work with in relations. There's also trying to crash computer systems, hack into large businesses, maybe steal personal information, putting political messages to spread propaganda on the internet, trying to attack very important infrastructure like the power grid, water companies, water systems, fuel and communications. Cyber warfare is a very large area now that is something that our government really has to stay on top of. But I have no doubt that our organizations are also engaged in cyber warfare when it comes to our enemies. Just some things to highlight about terrorism. A lot of times terrorism can be motivated by religious reasons, right? Religious, some religions have strong terrorist cells who believe that people who are not a part of their religion are infidels and they need to be forcefully converted to their religion or killed. But also it could be differences in ideologies. That could be terrorists who are from a strongly religious nation where the religion is running the government. They strongly disagree with capitalistic, hedonistic America. It could be a country that, it could be a group that is for socialism. Everyone should have the same amount of all things, and there should be no upper class that's extremely filthy rich. And so they're against capitalists like America. Another thing about terrorism is it's designed to produce fear. In the population. It can include a terrorist act can include any of these types of tactics. Another type of warfare is biological warfare, or it may be called chemical warfare, using things like dangerous chemicals like anthrax, or using things nowadays, this kind of gives it the biological aspect, using viruses. Excuse me. Using viruses to try to wage warfare against your enemies. And here's some of the different viruses and different biological warfares that have been introduced. Any questions on the foreign policy aspect of ways that we wage war? All right, another tool in our foreign policy toolbox is economic diplomacy. This is how countries relate and deal with other countries concerning all kinds of economic areas to try to keep countries from having to go to military conflict. This includes issues such as our trade relations with other nations, our exports and our embargoes, or our exports and imports. A concrete example of this came about in 1994, a treaty called NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. This was an agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And in this, the United States shipped several companies to Mexico to be headquartered in Mexico. And it was about improving relations between the three nations of North America, but also improving the economic situation. So let's look at all of the tools that are in the foreign policy toolbox. There can be treaties between nations and executive agreements between leaders. Countries appoint ambassadors to go to other countries and represent them. We have many US ambassadors, I'm going to guess in almost every nation on the planet. And so those ambassadors are living overseas in those nations to keep up good relations. Another type of tool is foreign aid, giving money or other types of aid to nations to strengthen relationships. International trade, military force, diplomacy. Diplomacy would include probably ambassadors and treaties, but diplomats are representatives from countries in which they are to work out issues with other nations. And instead of using combat and conflict, it's using diplomacy, sitting down and discussing things and trying to compromise and come to an agreement. So these slides kind of give more description of those tools. Do you have any questions now that we're done on chapter 18? All right. We'll see you Friday morning. Get your assignments in that you haven't completed yet. And have a great, the rest of your hump day and a great Thursday.